is first love. There are a few interpretations, but most commentaries and scholars would agree that it refers to the early love for Jesus and the love for one another, a fruit of loving Jesus, right? Can I challenge you this morning to go a little deeper? Could there be a theological parallel going on here? And is it possible that in that one-dimensional interpretation, we could be missing another important part that Jesus is trying to make here? This is where I want to challenge you this morning. What if first love is also not in place of, so don't misunderstand me, but also is referring to God's first love, Israel? I can see that theological lens might not clearly be seen in the immediate text of Revelation 2, but if we overlay some Old Testament scriptures, Paul's teachings, early church history, and the context of the church of Ephesus, I believe it'll become clear. So Israel was God's first love in the Old Testament, right? Israel is repeatedly called God's first love, his bride, his firstborn. Jeremiah 2:2 says, I remember the devotion of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and followed me through the desert. The Hebrew word for bride is kalah, which also means completion, to make whole, perfection. Many scholars and rabbis believe that the 40 years of the wilderness was God's honeymoon to his people, Israel. Now, when I first heard this, I thought this could be hard. This can be hard to wrap your mind around as a 21st century believer, right? Because at least for me, the first thing I think of what comes to mind when I think about the 40 years in the wilderness is not honeymoon. What's our first thought usually when we think about that time? Complaining, right? Disobedience, obstinance, right? Certainly does not sound like a honeymoon that I would be after. So how could God miss those days? Rabbis in Jewish tradition says that this idea is particularly reflected in Hosea and Jeremiah, that the 40 years in the wilderness was in fact God's honeymoon to Israel, because it was more than any time in history where Israel was closest to God. When I was reading that verse, it made me think of playing on the playground as a kid, right? And you're picking teams. Everyone ever been picked for teams, right? Dodgeball or kickball, whatever. And there was always that one kid who was always chosen last, right? Because they were too little, not coordinated, didn't play well with others, whatever it may be. That was Israel. God knew that, and he still said, yep,